Welcome everyone to our December council meeting. As the meeting chair, I give my consent for this open council meeting to be streamed live, recorded and published online. Anyone who is invited to read out a question or a presentation will be recorded, and their voice, image and comments will form part of the live stream and recording. The chair and or the CEO have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially inappropriate to be published. The stream will stop prior to the closed section of the meeting and will commence for the conclusion of the meeting. The public is able to view the live stream via the website at www.pyrenees.vic.gov.au. Should technical issues prevent continuation of the stream, a recording will be made available on our website. Please stand for the opening prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask you to give your blessing to this council, direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of your glory and the true welfare of the people of the Pyrenees Shire. Amen. We acknowledge the people past and present of the Wadawurrung, Dja Dja Wurrung, Eastern Maar and Watchabollock tribe, whose lands form the Pyrenees Shire. We pay our respects to the customs, traditions and stewardship of the land by the elders and people of these tribes on whose land we meet today. With everyone in attendance, I believe there are no apologies. Any notice of disclosure of interest by councillors or officers? None. Thank you very much. Confirmation of the previous minutes of ordinary council meeting held on 16th of November 2021, as previously circulated to council. Please confirm. Moved Councillor Vance, seconded Councillor Ferrari. All those in favour? Carried. Is there any business arising from those minutes? No business arising. Thank you. We're now at public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to ask questions of council at ordinary council meetings. Members of the public may attend the meetings in person to verbally ask questions. All attendees must register by midday on the day of the meeting to ensure council adheres to the numbers of attendees permitted under COVID safe plan. To register, call 1300 797 363 or visit the website. Members of the public who are unable to attend in person can participate in question time by submitting their questions in writing, either online, through council website, by mail or hand delivered. Person can ask a maximum of 2 questions at any one meeting on any topic, and the questions and responses shall not exceed 5 minutes. Questions are to be received by 12 noon on the day of the meeting. Questions are read by the chairperson during public participation. The chairperson or councillor or council officer to whom the question is referred may immediately answer the question, take the question on notice for the next ordinary meeting. Public submissions follow the same guidelines. We have received a submission from St Andrew's Uniting Church in Beaufort regarding welcome to Beaufort signs. Dear Sir, we would like to draw your attention to the content of the new welcome signs erected at both entrances to our town. We have noted and are very concerned that the Uniting Church emblem has been omitted at both entrances. Uniting Church is one of the biggest providers of services in Australia, yet the decision makers who decided without consultation with us have omitted the UC emblems from the new Welcome to Beaufort signs. This omission has overlooked what we do locally and has distressed our local members, who are small in numbers but still provide food vouchers, utility provision, counselling and comfort to this community when the need arises. We respectfully request that this correspondence is tabled at the next council meeting so that all councillors and staff are informed of the situation and can appreciate the hurt and disappointment felt by the Uniting Church. Yours faithfully, Reverend David Thompson. Mr. Nolan, would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm happy to respond to the submission by Mr. Thompson. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the good work that all the churches do within our communities across the Shire, and in this case in particular, the Uniting Church and the various services that it does provide, even though they are small in number. They're very much a volunteer organisation and a church-based organisation. In respect of the signs, signs at the entrance to Beaufort, newly erected signs, they were an initiative of the Rotary Club of Beaufort and supported by council financially and also in principle. As part of the agreement that council entered into with the Rotary Club, council provided authorisation and responsibility to the Rotary Club for receiving, assessing and managing applications for Beaufort not-for-profit service clubs and community groups, wholly made up of volunteers who seek to be displayed, promoted on the asset. So to that extent, council would be very happy to liaise directly with the Rotary Club and the Uniting Church to consider the request that's been made by the Uniting Church. I do understand that the Uniting Church did have a logo on the previous signs that was brought to my attention today, and I'd be happy, Mr. Mayor, to convene an opportunity for the Uniting Church, Mr. Thompson, and any other representatives from the Uniting Church to meet with representatives from the Rotary Club who are aware of the matter being brought to council's attention, have provided a response back to council on that. It is acknowledged that there has been a fair amount of publicity around the signs prior to them being erected, and at that point in time, it was understood that the Rotary Club hadn't had an approach from the Uniting Church at that stage. But having said that, the Uniting Church did have an emblem on the sign prior, on the old sign. So happy to convene that opportunity, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nolan. Is there any questions from the gallery or presentations? None? Thank you very much. Number 10, items for noting. Are there any points to be brought forward by any councillor in the items for noting? Moved Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Keogh. All those in favour? Carried. One more. Item 13.1, Asset and Development Services. Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information that is relevant to making a determination for the use and development of a single dwelling at 1035B Elmhurst Glenpatrick Road, Glenpatrick. The site of this planning application is within the Rural Conservation Zone, and it's also subject to the restructure overlay and bushfire management overlay. The site is 20.4 hectares, and access to the site is via an unmade government road on the eastern boundary, which intersects the Glenpatrick Elmhurst Road. The application was referred to the Country Fire Authority in their role as a determining referral authority. The CFA have provided conditional consent to the granting of a planning permit. The Glenpatrick locality is identified under the Pyrenees Planning Scheme as an area to be protected for its significant environmental attributes. The Rural Conservation Zone has been applied to this area in recognition of the landscape, environmental values of the locality, high degree of environmental hazard, and sensitivity to environmental deterioration. The subject site is within an area identified to be environmentally sensitive. Local policy seeks to preserve the hillscapes, ridgelines, and key topographic features by preventing and discouraging inappropriate use and development on land that is demonstrated to have serious environmental management constraints, and to encourage increased tree and vegetation cover on hills and slopes. The documentation accompanying the planning permit application does not suitably demonstrate how the proposed use and development will enhance the natural environment, or how the development takes into account the conservation values and environmental sensitivity of the locality. Specifically, the application does not seek to address the impacts associated with the removal of native vegetation to achieve the required amount of defendable space and the development of appropriate access. Rather, the application claims that no native vegetation will be removed. The bushfire management requires removal of over 5,500 square metres of native vegetation to achieve a level of defendable space for the development. The application of the bushfire management overlay at this location identifies the site as being an area of extreme bushfire hazard. Clause 1302, Part 1, seeks to direct population growth and development to low-risk locations and ensure safe access to areas where human life can be protected from the effects of bushfire. Access to the subject site is limited to a singular point of ingress via the Glenpatrick Elmhurst Road. This road is narrow with heavily vegetated verges and may not be available to support the evacuation of residents from the subject site or access for emergency services in the instance of a bushfire. The responsible authority must ensure settlement growth and development approvals can implement bushfire protection measures without unacceptable biodiversity impacts. Whilst the application details how the development may meet the approved measures for bushfire protection, it does not satisfactorily identify the site as being suitable for residential development when balancing the objectives of the Rural Conservation Zone against the impacts associated with achieving the required defendable space. For these reasons, it's the officer's recommendation that Council issue a notice to refuse a grant a planning permit. For the reasons as detailed in the report, including that the proposed use and development is not supported by clause 1306 of the Rural Conservation Zone. The proposed use and development is not supported by local policy objectives as described in clause 2.03, and the proposed use and development is not supported by clause 1302 bushfire planning.
Councillors, we have a recommendation. Councillor Clark.
Can I move alternate, please, Mayor? If I can get up on the screen.
Yes, we have an alternative motion tendered by Councillor Clark. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Vance, seconded. All those in favour?
It's me. You might like to brief the gallery as to what the recommendation is or what the motion is.
I was going to say all those in favour of hearing the amendment. Sorry. The condition, there's a alternate set of conditions set forth for council to consider if they wish to approve the development. And those conditions basically cover approval by the responsible authority of plans, before the use and development begins, plans to the satisfaction of the responsible authority must be submitted to and approved by the responsible authority. If approved, plans will be endorsed and form part of the permit. The development hereby permitted and shown on the endorsed plans must not be amended for any reason without prior written consent by the responsible authority. Before a building permit can be issued, Crown Allotment 17, Section 5 and Crown Allotment 31, Section 5 must be consolidated under Subdivision Act 1988 to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. Building and works, the layout of the site and size of the development hereby permitted must be generally in accordance with the plan submitted with the application and endorsed by the responsible authority. All building works associated with the development must be in accordance with the Building Act 1993 and Building Regulations 2018. The applicant is responsible for the control and construction waste during construction and its removal upon completion and the reinstatement of damaged areas about the site to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. All building and works must be located clear of any easements or water or sewer mains unless written approval is approved by the relevant authority. No storm water from the development shall drain or discharge from the land to waterways or adjoining properties without the prior approval of responsible authority. The dwelling hereby permitted must not be occupied until such time as it is connected to a reticulated potable water supply or have an alternative potable water supply with adequate storage for domestic use as well as for firefighting purposes. Country Fire Authority conditions will be required to be met. Native vegetation removal will require adherence to the permit obligations. Vegetation protection works will be required. Environmental Health Department will assess all issues, as will the Engineering Department. Vehicle access will be required for all necessary responsible authority approved vehicles. And the times for starting and completion will be nominated. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You might have to gong me out. I may take a little longer than my prescribed 3 minutes on this, but let's just say.
I haven't started the clock yet.
Excellent, that's good. I remember going to Glenpatrick in the 1970s with my father, who was a councillor of the Shire of Lexington, when people started building houses up there, just to try and get a bit of an understanding of it. And remembering how pretty a spot it is. I went back today to have a look at this site before coming to the council meeting today, as I often like to do, and just reminded myself again how gorgeous a part of our Shire it is. It is one of the prettiest parts of our Shire. And while this application isn't perfect, it's a bit of a classic of the real challenges that we get as a council. There's an established pattern of development throughout that valley. There's a number of houses there, and there's a number of houses there that have withstood bushfire before. Yet we're making a decision today in a different environment because we've actually got a different set of rules. And particularly, we've got now the bushfire management overlay, which was a result of the 2010 Black Saturday fires that came in 2014. That wasn't in place when those other properties were built. But in saying that, what I'm proposing to my fellow councillors, and thank you for your support, Councillor Vance, is that I think we should grant a permit here. I actually think it is right that we would grant another house in this beautiful valley for someone to enjoy in that sense. And that's not, that's not without risk. We fully understand that it's not without risk. It's a very difficult one for councillors, and it is for officers, and fully respect the view of the officers today. They've given us a view based on what is written in our scheme. How do you deal with the protection of human life? Do you actually not build anywhere? Do you not build anywhere where we have a treaty? You don't build in St. Valley. Do you not build in Lexington, not build in amphitheatre? I don't think that's our message as councillors or the message we want to send is the only places are safe to build is Beaufort, Ballarat and Melbourne. That's not the message we want to send.
There are trees in Beaufort.
There is too. And protection of human life can be dealt with in other ways. Our messaging in this state is really clear. If it's a bad fire day, do not stay. So protection of human life we can deal with in other manners. That's how I've looked at this today. Do we meet the requirements of the safety? And my read on this, Mr. Gowans, I might ask this to you as a question. Effectively, the CFA have raised no objection to this. They've just simply conditioned that we actually make the conditions that we've suggested here in the permit in the sense of things. Is that a correct assessment for me to make as a councillor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Clark. Yes, these applications are referred to the CFA, and to date, most of the responses we get back from the CFA have a very standard set of conditions, which do provide information on what clearance profile you would need to make the property defendable from a bushfire risk level. So they have met their obligations. However, they are a very set of standard conditions that the CFA provide, and unfortunately, the risk around balancing the values of both managing for bushfire and managing for environment are not necessarily the remit of the CFA. They've got a remit to ensure preservation of life. And to the letter of the law, their standard permit conditions provide that. But the challenge before council is around what's more important here. Is it the underlying conservation zone, or is it the ability to meet the obligations of the BMO? But I'll leave that to council to decide.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Gowans, and that helps significantly because, certainly my reading of this as a humble councillor is that the CFA could give us a little bit more help as councillors. They are the experts in this field. And while you say, I think you're probably quite correct, Mr. Gowans, in saying, in fact, I know you're quite correct in saying they have met the minimum requirement. You've chosen your words carefully, but I appreciate that. I think that gives us an answer in the context of this. And as you've also said, this is a balance between, this is one obligation, but there are other obligations, and the native vegetation is one you picked on. So I'll go to that one as well. And I certainly wouldn't say the application is perfect here. In having a look at the site today, there is native vegetation there, and quite clearly the application says that there is no native vegetation to be damaged. Well, I certainly don't believe that to be true, but I don't think that's a basis on which we actually would knock the permit back. I think there's ways that we manage that, and the conditions here, which effectively require a proper set of offsets to be in place before a building permit, an actual building permit is issued, can deal with that in a proper manageable way for the landholder, and they understand their obligations and what they're required to do in that sense. So I think we can condition that one through. So this isn't an easy decision, but that's why we have councillors in this context to make these decisions, and I appreciate the help to Officer Guinness, but certainly in my sense, I would like to see councillors support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not without a certain degree of serious consideration, as Councillor Clark has said. My thoughts in this issue is that there's been families living in this valley around the very site that's proposed to build a house on for many, many years. We all become very much aware after Black Saturday and the other fires that we've had in the last 2 years through Gippsland, the danger that there is there. We understand on these total fireban days, and when there's a fire coming, you get out, you don't hang about if you're smart. Pyrenees, we've been named after the exact mountain where they want to build, and it goes right around the northern end of our shire, as we're all well aware. And if you look at the amount of homes and where people have built and settled. It's been going on for a long time. Certainly, the welfare side of it's got to be given, but as far as I'm concerned, I cannot justify knocking back the permit when we see other homes really close to this one that have been approved in the past. So I will be supporting Councillor Clark's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Ferrari?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is one of these situations where the council has been charged with making decisions, It's a good idea, thank you. This is one of those situations where council have been charged with making decisions and taking into consideration rules and regulations and overlays imposed or suggested by other agencies, yet the council is the decision maker. There has been significant discussion undertaken in relation to this application, and of course each application is assessed and discussed on its merits. That's how it has to be, and I think it really highlights the complexities at times that is faced by council in determining a position on an application. This is one of those times. It's very, very difficult, but we try and do the best we can. I do note what Councillor Clark and Councillor Vance have mentioned, that there are houses across the municipality in similar locations that pose similar risks, and in context of preservation of life, if a bushfire occurs, leave early. That's a consistent and relevant message, and one we subscribe to. So on that basis and all things considered, I'll be supporting the application.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Gow? No. I find this motion before us basically is between, do we lock up land that people own and bar them from using as a residence because we have no trust in their own judgment as to what is safe and what is not safe, or we want to save some flower or plant or shrubbery. All these matters, I think, need to be balanced, and as mentioned by my fellow councillors, the balancing of that comes down to the council making a determination of whether these people get a permit to build or not build. And if they do get a permit to build, it is under the approved permit regulations as we've discussed. So I'll be supporting the alternative motion here. So having said that, councillors, all those in favour of the alternative motion? It's carried. Thank you very much. Oops.
Mr. Mayor, can I just say that the preamble to that decision would be the same, but it's obviously a notice of decision to grant a permit.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Gowans. 13.12, planning report for the use and development of a single dwelling and outbuildings at 705 Ararat, Sanana Road, Crowlands. Mr. Gowans.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information that is relevant to making a determination for the use and development of a single dwelling and primary produce sales at 705 Ararat, Sanana Road, Crowlands. The proposed use and development is subject to a planning permit, as the subject lot is less than 40 hectares and the proposal is within 100 metres of a dwelling in separate ownership. The subject site has an area of 3.03 hectares and it fits within the farming zone. Notice was sent to 12 neighbouring landowners abutting the site, and public notice was also provided by Council's website. 2 submissions were received, and the grounds of submission are summarised in the report, but include that the location of the proposed farm gate and dwelling in relation to neighbouring properties was a concern, that the use of the land as a rural industry was concerning, traffic safety concerns associated with property access and farm gate and speed limit of the Ararat Crollins Road, a suggestion that an alternative point of access be encouraged, concerns around odour and noise associated with mushroom growing and production, a concern around loss of privacy, concerns around impact on horse keeping on adjoining property, and a suggestion that storage should be positioned to the north of the property so as not to detract from views. In relation to each of those points, our officers have provided a response, and in relation to the location of the proposed farm gate and dwelling, and citing in relation to neighbouring dwellings, the farming zone identifies primary produce sales as a Section 1 use, which is a permit not required if the use meets the following conditions. 1, that it must not be within 100 metres of a dwelling in separate ownership, and 2, the area used for the display and sale of primary produce must not exceed 50 square metres. In this instance, the setbacks are less than 100 metres from a dwelling, are not in the same ownership, and the proposed use must be treated as a Section 2 permit required use. This allows the responsible authority to understand and manage the impacts. The applicant has responded to this concern, advising that they are flexible in the location of the primary produce sales. In relation to the dwelling, the proposed dwelling is set back 113 metres from the nearest neighbouring dwelling. This setback satisfies the distance specified within the scheme. The use of the land as a rural industry was a concern, and the application before council does not satisfy the definition of a rural industry, and therefore the concerns raised are not valid. Traffic safety concerns associated with the property and the speed limit of the Ararat Crollins Road. The Ararat Sanana Road is an arterial road managed by Vic Roads. The approval associated with the construction of a crossover property access point is subject to further approval of Vic Roads, who have set criteria to be satisfied. Should a planning permit be granted, it is subject to the applicant obtaining approval from Vic Roads to construct a vehicle crossover and complying with traffic management conditions that may apply. In relation to the impact on horses kept on an adjoining property, the objection does not describe how the proposed use and development will impact the keeping of horses on the neighbouring property. In the absence of this information, officers are unable to understand and do not require actions to mitigate any impacts. In relation to odour and noise associated with mushroom growing and production, this can be managed through existing obligations on all landholders to comply with the EPA Act. In relation to suggestion that storage should be positioned to the north of the property so as not to detract from views, the proposed location of the infrastructure associated with the agricultural activity complies with the requirements of the planning scheme. And in relation to loss of privacy, privacy is not a planning consideration in the context of this application. Therefore, in conclusion, it should be noted that the use of the subject land for agricultural purposes is a Section 1 use and therefore does not require a planning permit. Consideration of this application is limited to the use of the land for a dwelling within the farming zone and the primary produce sales. The assessing officer is satisfied that land management plan be supplied with the application, or that the land management plan supplied with the application justifies the development of a dwelling. And officers have assessed the submissions made against the application in accordance with the scheme and have determined that the points raised do not sufficiently justify refusing a granting a planning permit. Therefore, it's the officer's recommendation that council, having considered all the matters under Section 60 of the Planning and Environment Act and the provisions of the Pyrenees Planning Scheme, determines to issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit under the provisions of the Pyrenees Planning Scheme for the use and development of a single dwelling and primary produce sales at Crown Allotment 14, Section 5, Township of Crollins, Parish of Crollins, at 705 Ararat Sanana Road, Crollins, subject to conditions which are detailed in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Gowans. Councillors, I have a motion before us. Do I have someone? Moved, Councillor Vance, seconded. Councillor Ferrari. Any discussion? Councillor Vance.
Brief one, just a brief one, Mr Mayor. It's pleasing always to see somebody make a new venture into our communities, and the proponents, I endorse what they're proposing to do and wish them all the very best with their mushroom growing enterprise. It certainly will be a new venture in the Crowlands area, but it's showing some incentive from people from outside of our circle that believe that they can make these things work. And if it comes to fruition and they are successful, well, that'll be all for the benefit of the Crowlands community, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. Councillor Ferrari? No. Any councillor wish to speak? All those in favour of the motion? No. Thank you. (13.13). Planning report for the development of an agricultural shed at Pims Road, Redbank. Mr Gowans.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information that is relevant to making a determination on planning permit PA 3031/20 for the development of an agricultural shed and removal of native vegetation at Pims Road, Redbank. The application seeks permission to construct a 12 metre by 9 metre shed to store equipment associated with the maintenance of the 1.8 hectare property, as well as the removal of native vegetation from a road reserve associated with the establishment of an access crossover. The proposed development is subject to a planning permit in accordance with clause 35.07 relating to the farming zone and clause 45.05 relating to the restructure overlay. The current status of the land is vacant. The information submitted with the planning permit did not sufficiently demonstrate how the proposed use and development accords with the objectives defined within the Pyrenees planning scheme. A request for additional information was made in accordance with section 54 of the Act on the 21st of September this year, which requested that information relating to the following be supplied. Further information relating to how the development of the shed will provide for the use of land for agriculture. Further information around how the development will encourage the retention of productive agricultural land, and further information relating to encouraging the use and development of land based on comprehensive and sustainable land management practices and infrastructure provision. Further information as to the purpose of a 108 metre square shed and how the siting of the shed on the site minimises the loss of productive agricultural land, and detailed plans of elevations. In the absence of the evidence that demonstrates how the proposal responds to relevant policy, officers have not been able to assess the proposal as required by the Pyrenees Planning Scheme and the Planning Environment Act, and therefore cannot be reasonably satisfied that the proposed development is an appropriate planning outcome. Therefore, it's the officer recommendation that council notes the application is incomplete and does not allow for the responsible authority to undertake an assessment against the objectives of the planning scheme, and therefore issue a notice of refusal to grant a planning permit for the reasons listed in the report.
Thank you, Mr Gowans. I have a motion before us, councillors. Councillor Clark wishes to move an alternate. Do I have a second? Councillor Ferrari seconding the motion. The alternate offered relates to notice of decision to grant a permit under endorsed plans, building and works, building approvals, referral to North Central Catchment Management Authority, use of outbuildings, construction waste, easements, storm water management, vegetation protection, and time for starting and completion.
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Decision to grant.
Decision to grant, sorry. Councillor Clark.
It's not a notice of decision. Notice of decision is going to be an objection.
No, it should be
There's
just
no objections. It's a decision to grant subject to
Yeah.
conditions.
That's what it says.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're just clarifying our terminology when it's the CEO, as long as we get the minutes right, that's the main thing. Councillors, again, I'm suggesting here that we would actually issue a permit rather than issue a notice of refusal in this context. And the reasons for this are probably pretty straightforward in that sense of things. And if you note in the report, it's quite clear that the officers have assessed this on the basis of the farming zone particularly, and the particular relevance of the farming zone. And in that context, the applicant has quite clearly in his application talked about two things that I think are very relevant. One, he's talked about managing the fire risk. And when I visited the block today, it was mown as neat as a pin. I wish my lawn was as good as he'd mown his block. And weed control, which is a clear issue for him, but also an impact on his neighbours. And again, he has a significant weed problem that he needs to manage. What he hasn't addressed is a broader agricultural use to the block. And that is normally what we would ask for as a council in that context. But I think we have to be a bit realistic about this. This block is in Redbank and it is less than 5 acres in size. So it would be quite legitimate for us to ask this gentleman to provide us a plan of how he would run 3 or 4 sheep on the block. But I would ask myself for what value we would do that in that context. We could ask him for a plan to plant 25 olive trees. And again, I'd say for what value would we ask that of him in the context of this block in that sense of things. The report also talks a little bit about understanding more of the shed, and hopefully the conditions will deal with that in terms of having that information for council officers before the permit's dealt with in that sense of things. And again, I know in our discussion as councillors, we've questioned the scale of the shed in this sense. And again, I kind of went through that thought about, does he need a shed that's 100 metres square, which is only 1/200th of the block. So it's not a quarter of the block or a tenth of the block. But anyways, does he need a shed that big just to get the water for the 4 sheep? So again, we could ask questions, but I just don't think we need to do that in this case. I think the block is so insignificant and it is in the rural zone. That's not ideal, but that's the reality. So I understand how the officers have assessed this in this context, but I think this is the right decision for council tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Ferrari.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I endorse the comments by Councillor Clark, and would just like to add that I'd actually like to thank the council officers involved in the work they do and how they apply themselves to these applications, with at times little room for discretion or flexibility in the planning scheme rules and regulations. And at times it may appear that the time it takes for the councillors to make a decision, especially when it's in contrast to the recommendations of the office, isn't commensurate to the time taken to compile the reports. But in contrast to that, the work of the officers can never go underestimated, and in fact, it's their work and details contained in the submissions is what assists us greatly in making decisions what we feel are the best for the municipality. And under those conditions, and with all things considered, I will support the granting of a permit with the mentioned conditions applicable.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The planning approvals, as councillors prior have stated, have rules set to them. Sometimes I wonder at the wisdom of these rules, but they're the rules that we're set and they're the rules we've got to work with. A lot of them were set 20 years ago to protect agricultural land. 20 years down the track, we find ourselves living in a totally different environment. We did have a developer come through our smaller communities many years ago and buy up all these small blocks and sold them off to people who were unaware of the legalities that might meet them into the future. But anyway, that's history. I just feel that to encourage the lifestyle that people want to live now, on the back of COVID, we find metropolitan people are able to move to the country sometimes and and operate a business. I know in this situation that's not the case. It's just a gentleman who lives out of Geelong who wants to keep his block neat and tidy. It requires a tractor to get over 3 acres. So dragging a tractor from Geelong up and down the highway is not much fun to tidy up your block each time. So I'm more than happy to support Councillor Clark's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. I'd like to reinforce the point made by Councillor Ferrari. We as councillors rely heavily on the officers' work and diligence to come to us with what they believe are the rules and regulations and give us a proposed recommendation. And we wouldn't have it any other way. We certainly wouldn't accept the officers coming to us that proposed anything against the rules and regulations. It's up to council to make those decisions. And council have a little bit more flexibility than the officers do. So again, I support the officers in the work that they do, and they do a damn good job for this council. And I support council's ability to weigh up those matters in the fashion it sees fit. So, councillors, we have an amended recommendation here. All those in favour? Carried. Item 13.2, Corporate and Community Services, Community Assets Committees. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to appoint committee members to Council's community asset committees following the annual general meetings held earlier this year. Community asset committees are appointed to manage our community assets on behalf of Council in accordance with an instrument of delegation and supporting governance and operations manuals. Council currently has 5 asset committees to manage the following assets: Beaufort Community Bank Complex, Brewster Hall, Landsborough Community Precinct, Snake Valley Hall, and Warburg Community Hub. In addition to the appointment of committee members, it was noted earlier in the year that Brewster Hall Community Asset Committee has low cash flow levels at the moment due to a lack of facility use during COVID. So this report is also therefore requesting Council to authorise a payment of $2,000 to the committee to assist with its maintenance obligations. So the officer recommendation is that Council formally appoints community representatives to its community asset committees as detailed in the report, adopts the attached instruments of delegation for each of the community asset committees established under Section 65 of the Local Government Act 2020. In accordance with Section 47 of the Local Government Act 2020, Council officers to appropriately guide and monitor activities of the committees and report annually on committee activities to Council, and that Council approves the distribution of $2,000 to the Brewster Community Asset Committee to assist with the maintenance of that hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Councillor Theo, seconded Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Sorry, my microphone. Just again, it is a formality, but just a thanks to all those people that make these halls and activities that happen in these different areas happen, and also the fact that it's wonderful we can support the Brewster Community Hall. It's been such a trying time for so many of these community groups, so that's wonderful to be able to do that.
Councillor Vance.
Yeah, I just note, Mr Mayor, that the Landsborough Community Precinct is down to a very low number there, and I would appeal to anybody that might be watching tonight from our end of the world. The Landsborough Community Precinct takes in the caravan park, the swimming pool and the resource centre. and it's a vital part of our community. So if there's anybody out there that would like to pitch in and join this committee, I would encourage you to do so. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Vance. Any other councillors? Councillor Clark?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. But just to make again a comment in this public forum to thank the volunteers who put their hands up for all these communities across the Shire. They're tremendous value and significant help to council in providing these services to their communities.
Thank you, councillor Clark. Yes, without our volunteers, there would be an awful lot of things not being done around our Shire, around our state and around our country. They are the backbone of a lot of work that we just expect to get done. Councillors, all those in favour? Carried. Item 13.22, Foundational Workforce Plan 2021 to 2025. Ms Bramwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide council with information relating to the Foundational Workforce Plan 2021-2025. Section 46 of the Local Government Act requires the Chief Executive Officer to develop and maintain a workforce plan that describes the organisational structure of the council, specifies projected staffing requirements for a period of at least 4 years, and sets out measures to seek to ensure gender equality, diversity and inclusiveness. The first stage in this workforce development is a foundational workforce plan required by the 31st of December 2021. This foundational plan for the 4 years was developed during 2021 and approved by the Chief Executive Officer in November 2021. The foundational workforce plan is the basic plan required to meet the minimum needs of an organisation in mapping their workforce needs. It serves as a starting point to develop an operational or strategic work plan based on the unique requirements of an organisation. As this plan is foundational, it allows for future amendment as Council's executive leadership team develop and implement a capacity building plan agreed with Council earlier in 2021 and needed to overcome the significant financial constraints on growing Council's administrative workforce as detailed in the 10-year financial plan, yet maintain the change and growth necessary to fully deliver the Council plan and community vision. The attached plan is designed to start the conversation on strategic workforce planning with a view to developing an operational workforce plan in the future during 2022. The plan will support the EL executive leadership team in gaining a better understanding of future service and workforce needs to meet future demand. Section 46(6) of the Local Government Act requires the Mayor, councillors and members of council staff to have access to this plan. This report allows for provision to the Mayor and councillors for information, and the plan will subsequently be circulated to all members of council staff. And it's now the officer's recommendation that council receives the attached foundational workforce plan to 2021 to 2025 in accordance with Section 46(6) of the Local Government Act 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bramwell. Move, councillor Vance, seconded councillor Keogh. Any discussion, councillors? Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just, I think, a couple of things to say about this because this is a bit of a new one for us, and I think probably for our community. But it is a journey, not a destination at this point in time, and I think we recognise that. But it also identifies quite clearly we've got some challenges. We're in a rate-capped environment, so our capacity to grow our staffing resources is not good. And the other thing about being a small organisation, we have a lot of individual people who do jobs specifically for council and for this community, and if they're not here, those jobs don't get done. So they're some of the challenges that we need to work through. I'd just like to note that we've done a number of these strategies, and this is the only one, of course, that our manager people and culture has done. There's a range of other people in the organisation have done a number of these strategies in response to Local Government Act. And through you, Mr. CEO, my appreciation, I think all of council's appreciation for the work that they've done. We've done most of this stuff in-house. We've met all our timelines this year, and that's been a challenge, I know, for a lot of councils to meet the timeline. So certainly my appreciation and council's appreciation for the work of those staff in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Clark. Recommendation, councillors, all those in favour? Carried. 13.31, the Avoca Chinese Garden. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is for council to consider a request for assistance from the Avoca Chinese Garden Committee. Following a written request by the Avoca Chinese Garden Committee, councillors met with members of the committee to discuss the relevant issues at a briefing, and the issues related to their capacity to maintain and operate the garden into the future, and to consider options for providing support for the committee. The Avoca Chinese Garden was established as a result of a small town transformation grant initiated by several passionate community members on private land at the corner of Dundas and Cambridge Street, Avoca. A 30-year lease over the land was agreed with the committee by the owner commencing in September 2013. A local committee was established as an incorporated legal entity as the lessee. The committee has continued to maintain the garden to a very high standard and has become a much loved asset of Avoca. The site is open to the public and is used for a range of events and activities and as a place of contemplation for locals and visitors. The committee runs events on the site to raise funds to support the maintenance of the garden, which is undertaken by extensive volunteer labour, as well as through maintenance contractor to the extent that funds allow. Council are advised that the average age of the committee members is around 70 years, and the work required to run and maintain the asset is becoming a challenge to committee members. There are several options that council could consider in supporting the committee, as outlined in the report. Those four options as outlined include, in the first instance, the council provides a number of community grant opportunities for members and committees and groups across the Shire to apply for funds for community grants. And so the committee, as an incorporated entity, is able to apply for those funds to assist them in some of the aspects of the work that they do. Particularly in respect of running events. The second option is that council could provide a fixed amount of financial support annually to the group towards engaging a contractor to undertake the maintenance work that's necessary, which is problematic for an ageing group of volunteers. And this would ensure a minimum amount of revenue which the group could supplement with funds from any events that they run. This would allow the committee to continue to have a role and in how the site is managed and used into the future. The third option is that council could commence a process to take over the lease and take on the responsibility of the site. And this, of course, would be subject to an agreement with the current owner. And the annual maintenance cost is considered to be in the order of $8,000 a year if council was to choose that option. And that would also need to consider the long-term asset renewal, which is not factored into that annual component. Under that scenario, council would have control over the site and could agree to supporting ongoing role for the committee or not. Fourth option is that council could seek to commence discussions with the landowner to purchase the land and manage and maintain the assets ongoing. There's been no discussion to date with the owner on whether this option is available to council. Having considered the options, council, and drawn attention to some of the long-term asset management risks and costs associated with maintaining and managing such a facility, it's understood that the Avoca Chinese Garden obviously is a unique and highly valued asset for the Avoca community. The committee has done a fantastic job to initiate, maintain the garden since its establishment in 2013. Acknowledging the challenges outlined by the committee and having considered the options for council to provide support as outlined above, the following recommendation is made, and that is that council provides $3,000 to the Avoca Chinese Garden Committee annually, commencing from the current financial year, to assist with the maintenance and management of the garden. And secondly, that council reviews this arrangement and its level of support for the committee in 3 years' time.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Councillors. Moved Councillor Ferrari, seconded Councillor Clark. Any discussion, councillors? Councillor Ferrari?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think $3,000 is a small price to pay, considering it's such a fantastic and iconic facility. And you know, if it was let go by the way, which would be through circumstance, not by choice, I think we'd lose much more than $3,000 a year. There's just so much work that's gone into it. I commend the committee for their commitment and dedication in maintaining the gardens over many years. And as we have heard, they are sort of getting on a few years, and it would be nice, with respect to the current committee, for some younger residents across the municipality to step up and provide much needed assistance to community and volunteers, not just to the community garden, but right across the municipality, because there's so much pleasure that can be gained in volunteering. So again, if anyone's watching, and especially those younger brigade, if they feel like they want to volunteer, please put your hand up and do so, because many of our volunteers across the municipality, and certainly it's true around Beaufort, that they have been doing things for a very long time. They're very good at it, but they are getting tired and they do need some help. So please, if you can, support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Ferrari. Okay, the recommendation, councillors, all those in favour? Carried. We now come to item 14, councillor reports and general business. And being last brings you to being first. Councillor Ferrari, your report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As usual, I've had the council briefing sessions. I've had the audit and risk committee, and I had the pleasure with you, Mr. Mayor, of attending a book launch, The Undertaker's Daughter, at the library on the 25th of November, and it was a great evening. It was attended by 30 odd people, and the author, whose name escapes me at the moment, I'm sorry, but the lovely lady from Skipton originally, and then I think she's in her 80s, and she's written a second book, which is a sequel to her first. So I think that's a really lesson for it all. It's never too late, and just have a go if you want to. But it was a fantastic evening. She's such a sprite, and she gave us a little reading from the book, which was very well accepted, and it was a fine evening. Had a meeting with, or attended the Beaufort Primary School graduation, presented to some of the students, and they're a great bunch, and we have a really healthy range of academics, artistic and sports focused students, and to hear some of their achievements through the year. I've only heard some of the achievements of the people receiving the awards, but it's just pretty amazing, and we've got some pretty special little people in our communities, and you know, they're our future leaders. So and I think we're in pretty good hands by the look of it. So it was really pleasing, and I think I spoke to the principal, who said there's about 160 students at Beaufort Primary School, which I didn't think to be that many, but anyway, I was pleased to hear it is. So that's really great. We'll be providing Christmas dinner at Beaufort again on Christmas Day for those in need of assistance or have no other people to spend Christmas with. So it will be at the Beaufort RSL at 12 p.m, lunch provided. And if you wish to attend, if you fit into that criteria, please provide your name to the Beaufort Community House prior for catering purposes. And that's usually attended by up to sort of 15 to 20 people. And it's a very pleasing day that we can provide something to those people on who need that little bit of assistance on such a special day. So, and we'll continue to do that while we can. And just while we're on Christmas, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish the community, the councillors and all council staff a Merry Christmas and a safe and prosperous New Year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferrari. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in terms of my month, the usual briefings and meetings that we've all attended. We had the annual general meeting for the Central Victorian Greenhouse Alliance a fortnight ago in Maryborough. It's the first time we've been together for 2 years. It was very nice to see a number of new faces that have got elected in council election last year, and somehow I end up being treasurer again. I don't know how that happened, but I'm there. That's all good. Number of MAV activities, of course, in the lead up to the end of the year, but they've all been very interesting and enjoyable. And especially I'd like to make note of the Pyrenees COVID-19 vaccination forum. We ran in this office a couple of days after the last council meeting to acknowledge Tanya. I was the moderator. Thankfully, I didn't have to get the stick out to manage the crowd, but we had fantastic presenters and speakers on the night, and especially like to credit to Kate Depler, who is in the other room and not with us in here tonight, but Kate's work in actually convening the forum and getting everybody together and getting the speakers there. I think it was really worth it. It was a great night, and of course, we're now into another routine of vaccination now for our children, which is terrific. And finally, like Councillor Ferrari, I'd like to wish our community the best for a safe, happy and very festive Christmas.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Keogh.
Got it now. Thank you. I'd like to reiterate what Councillor Clark said too about the COVID forum. That was such a wonderful opportunity to look into those queries that many parents have in regards to vaccinating children, particularly those children under 12, because we've gone through that period with the children over 12. So it was wonderful, and we just had wonderful people giving up their time and really giving out that information and dispelling myths, but also giving information out to empower those parents. So it was wonderful that day. We also, just a shout out while we're on making people aware, we've got, if you haven't seen on our council Facebook page, again, we've got a great team behind putting together a clip called 16 Days of Activism. And again, it's a really very worthwhile look, and just looking at how we can be inclusive and we respect people, and it's wonderful. So please check that one out. Also, we'll note that fire restrictions came in yesterday. So everyone's been busy across the Shire, fireproofing their residences and their farms, etc. The Snake Valley CFA held a community meeting at the skate park also on Sunday. And a shout out again, we spoke about some of the volunteers we have in our community. The Snake Valley CFA are incredible in the way they work towards actively protecting our community, and particularly being in a zone where it is, which is can be quite open to fire. It's wonderful that they did that for the community. Also, we had last week, we were privileged as councillors to investigate and see the Snake Valley Astronomical Association, and so to see their fantastic equipment and to see what they do when they open up for their public viewing days, which they do. And it's such a great little asset we have in our community. It's a wonderful little spot you can take children to. You can go become a member yourself, so you can be part of using the equipment that's there and being able to see what's in our skies above us. And what makes us part of this amazing universe and galaxy. So we thank Ken and his fellow astronomers for that time too. And check that out, please, on their website or on links from our website to get to that. Just referring back to, in regards to emergency, we have had a few storm events recently. There were some areas that were hit a little bit more than others, and Snake Valley was one of those areas in the recent events. But what was so heartening, and this is a huge thank you to those people in the community that helped others and checked that they were okay. There were a few instances where tree branches and things might have damaged property, but people were able to assist others and also clear areas to make sure that there was safe areas to be able to move about. So we thank those, and we thank all the council workers and contractors that helped with those events. And finally, I would also like to say, wishing everyone in our whole Shire and our workers and everyone a very joyful Christmas, a very safe holiday period, and also a wonderful new year ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, councillor Keogh. Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like councillor Ferrari, I was involved in the Audit and Risk Committee meeting on 23rd of November. Safe to say that I feel quite confident the Pyrenees Shire is tracking along fine at the moment. We're not the biggest shire in the state of Victoria, but we certainly hold our end up when it comes to performance. I did take part via Zoom in the MAV's Rural South Central Group meeting last week. At the end of the week, I had an RCV meeting in Castlemaine. We got together on Thursday night and had a dinner. That was our first occasion to actually get together and meet new members on the Board of Rural Councils Victoria. It was with some disappointment that we're losing one of our board members, the CEO from Warwick Nabil, Jessie is leaving us. She's going across to the state government to take up a role with the state government, which was disappointing because she's a very astute person. We then spent, we had an early meeting on Friday morning, and then we spent the rest of the day looking at the next 4 years and especially the next 12 months in how we're going to advocate with both the federal and the state governments for assistance for small rural councils. The three main areas that stood out for us were the ability to encourage further housing to the country areas, our roads, which have always got to be maintained, and pursue the federal government for financial assistance through the FAGS grants, and to concentrate and help small rurals and most rurals to be sustainable into the future. The message comes through loud and clear, especially from the federal government's outlook, that the next 12 months are going to be focused on economic recovery from this brute that we call COVID. It's had a massive effect on our country. I'm sure that none of us can evaluate the debt that it's created. We've got to work very hard to come out of that situation. It's not going to happen overnight. It might take a couple of generations. It might take 3 generations. We don't know. We're living in different times. And the environment, they're very keen to see money come back into the environment, which suits us with our roads and bridges. It was pleasing to note that Regional Councils Victoria is getting Australia-wide coverage at the moment with some of our toolkits that we're putting out, and especially the long-term financial plan toolkit. The regional cities have stepped up to the plate and requested copies of that toolkit. And we, in our wisdom, thought about charging them. We thought it'd be a good idea to give it to them free. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, sort of caper. And Councillor Keogh mentioned the fire restrictions have come into place. Well, I got a message on my phone this afternoon. There is actually a fire in the Crowlands area burning this afternoon. So the reality is with us. We think it's grown, but it still burns very easily. And like all other councillors, I would like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a safe and happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vance. During my first month as mayor, I wondered now what I ever did as a councillor, because all I've done is gone here, there and everywhere. The things that you guys have done whilst being mayors. So congratulations on your role as mayors. Went along to Committee of Ballarat evening, and that was a wonderful event with an exceptional speaker who had managed the site in Antarctica. And she'd done such a wonderful job with about 130 to 150 people for the summer. And then suddenly most of them go home and she's left with a group of about 25. And those 25 cover every opportunity that comes along. So 2 of them, plumbers, of course, have spent 2 weeks at Hobart Hospital understanding how to be theatre nurses in case the necessity arose. 2 of them, electricians, had spent 2 weeks at Hobart Hospital understanding the complexities of anaesthesiologists if they were needed. When the discussion came up about attempting certain things after the summer crew had left, her simple comment to her colleagues was, just remember who the anaesthesiologist is if you go and break a leg or break something. So whatever you do, be safe. It's not a bad effort. The market in Avoca restarted recently with the help of Beaufort and setting up the Beaufort market on the Saturday and the Avoca market on the Sunday, and was well attended in both cases. I attended the World Heritage listing of the Goldfields function, where we're asking the government to progress our claim to World Heritage approval. It's not going to be a quick thing. It usually takes quite a long while, but it has to go before the state government for approval and then forwarded on to the federal government for approval and then to UNESCO. So it's a slow process, but we certainly are hopeful that the goldfields we have in our region is world class. I attended the Avoca Primary School graduation, and the world's in good hands. If you look at some of these young people coming through, they have their eyes wide open about what's required, and they haven't as yet had their enthusiasm dulled by media or any of those other things. As with yesterday's Central Highlands Water meeting here in Beaufort, one of the highlights of the afternoon was the fact that the Beaufort primary school children came along to understand better water reuse, water savings, and they did a wonderful job of making the day far more interesting than it may have already been. And I'd like to reiterate something that Councillor Clark mentioned about staff organising things and coming up with things. And we have a wonderful staff here, and they're encouraged to come up with their ideas and put them forward. And if they meet the shakeout criteria, much like the COVID discussion has held, we end up having really good outcomes. And that's important for our community going forward. So, like my fellow councillors, I'd like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We've had a couple of really bad years, and those bad years are behind us. So let's leave it behind us. Let's start looking forward. Let's start looking up. Let's start appreciating what we've got and make a better life for ourselves in 2022. Merry Christmas to everyone. Thank you very much. I'd now like to move the meeting into closed council, where we will be considering Australia Day nominations and also a private matter brought to the attention of council. So can I have a mover? Councillor Ferrari, seconded Councillor Keogh. All those in favour? Carried. The meeting streaming will now cease. We will move into closed council. After the discussions are concluded, we will come back to streaming and report before closing the meeting. Thank you, everyone.